I've recently started changing the way that I practice as a doctor, and part of that has been learning how to say no and to just be okay with people being disappointed or being upset with me. And I wanted to go over how that journey has been going for me. I've noticed that a lot of other doctors and myself, I think, we're stuck in this cycle and trap where we just don't know how to say no. And it's damaging. It was damaging to me for a long time. And so I wanted to sort of share how the journey of me being able to set boundaries and how to finally be more authentic and real has been going for me in my actual practice with patients. Because I think sometimes with healthcare specifically too, I think that there's like this taboo or like there's this belief that if you say no, you're being selfish or being uncaring, or somehow you can't let anybody down, patients down, or your colleagues down because it's medicine, it's a medical thing. And I think that this could apply to like nurses and ER doctors and whatever else. I mean, I'm a primary care doctor in general internal medicine, and I really love what I do, and I think it's an amazing job in general. But I was somehow stuck in this trap and cycle where I, for whatever reason, it didn't occur to me that I was able to or allowed to set boundaries or to say no for literally 7 years straight. And obviously through residency and medical school, the same rules applied. And what this looked like for me specifically was having a hard time, declining patients' requests that sometimes made me feel uncomfortable or put me in a situation that I didn't really want to be in. Let's say, for example, that a patient was really excited about this medication that they wanted to take, that they thought was going to help them, but I didn't really feel comfortable with that. Or, somebody who hasn't been seen for a long time and then randomly calls and needs to be seen immediately when my schedule's full, and me just sort of dropping everything at the whatever and taking care of that request immediately. Or, just trying to anticipate what everybody else around me wanted and needed, and to just be that for everything and everybody. And I think, again, like becoming a doctor or becoming a professional or becoming successful is kind of, a perfect setup for the situation, because there's a lot of positive and negative reinforcement that goes along the way to create this version of you where you sort of are prioritizing keeping everything else afloat and not necessarily taking into consideration what you want to do or what you need to do or what you think you should do. And so I think that in medicine and doctors specifically, I see so many people going on for decades and decades and decades, just completely abandoning their own needs and priorities and wants. And I was definitely going down that path, and I finally sort of am seeing the light that that's not necessarily noble or good or even best for patients. And, I'll give you some examples of how that's going. I think part of the outlet, how that can manifest with patients is sort of, again, not necessarily being able to take a stand or say no to them, or sort of to give really straight answers and to sort of hedge your bets and to be vague about what you recommend. But now that I'm in this mode where I'm just sort of giving it to you real and giving it to you straight, I think it's sometimes refreshing for patients. After years of, monitoring lab work for cholesterol, I'm finally just saying, this has got to be addressed now. Like we've been waiting for too long. Or again, patients who maybe want to go on a GLP-1 and they're not, in my opinion, great candidates for one. And in the past, me being sort of like, okay, well, we'll do it and then I'll be uncomfortable and we'll kind of try to monitor it over time. But now I'm just like, this is what I think you should do. Take it or leave it, because that's what a doctor is. And I think in medicine, we kind of keep forgetting, and doctors keep forgetting, that they're the ones who went to med school. They're the ones who are in the seat of being a doctor. And, we don't need to do, or we shouldn't be doing things that we don't want to do or feel comfortable doing. We should do what we think is best for patients, even if it means them being upset or annoyed. And I know that sounds so basic and like we should already have been doing that. But I think a lot of doctors aren't doing that because, again, we have our own core conditioning and our own our own way of seeing things that led us to become doctors in the first place. And for a lot of us, that means maybe subconsciously even doing everything at all costs to be seen as likable or morally good or not disappointing people in the first place. So, this maybe sounds obvious to some people, but I think I can see in a lot of other doctors that it's really not. Like, there's a lot of people that are totally blind to the reality that they're not even aware of this in the first place, that they're just almost like a caricature of, a useful doctor that just sort of clicks everything that they need to do to get whatever anybody else wants from them done. And, we sort of become a commodity. We sort of become like this useful magic genie. And that's not what being a doctor really is, in my opinion, now that I'm starting to finally learn how to understand that my insecurities were driving me to do things and put myself in situations that I didn't want to be in. And again, with medicine, it's really challenging because it's like this moral thing, and choosing to go on vacation sometimes can even feel like you're doing something wrong. Even though I'm a primary care doctor, I'm not necessarily like doing anything that important all the time. It's not anything that needs to happen immediately or right this second. But I think this could also apply to other doctors too, whether you're an emergency room doctor or you're a nurse or whatever it ends up being. So I have to imagine that there's other people out there that are stuck in a cycle where they're not really sure or why they can't set boundaries or say no or prioritize their own schedule and tolerate the discomfort that triggers in them. Because for me, it took a long time to get there. And it took a lot of problems and a lot of discomfort and a lot of pain along the way for me to finally see it. And now that I'm taking care of patients in this way, where I'm more aware of, again, how my conditioning and how my insecurities were fueling decisions that I was making that were not helpful for me, I'm being a lot more authentic and real with my patients, and it's so much better for them too. I'm much more present, I'm much more focused, I'm able to give them truth, and I'm able to give them recommendations that are really coming from my beliefs and my knowledge, which is, I think has been honed in and developed for a long time. So they feel that I'm making sense, that is coming from a really genuine place, and it doesn't feel generic. It feels like truly catered to the situation and to the connection that we have and the relationship that we have. And also, because I'm, saying no to expanding my schedule beyond a certain point, or not agreeing to medications I don't want to prescribe for patients, or telling them exactly what I think that they should do and they can sort of do what they want with that information, is making me feel a lot more joyful and alive and present in the actual day-to-day life of being a doctor. So, again, this is stuff that we hear all the time, like be authentic, make your yes, yes, and your no, no, and all of these things we kind of know in our head, but I'm telling you that a lot of healthcare providers and doctors and myself don't get this and aren't grasping this in the way that we should. And I think a lot of it comes from this fear and this conditioning that, we'll either be bad or look bad, or we'll be selfish or look selfish, and that's just not true, Having limits, having boundaries, being human, not saying, not being able to absorb everything and everybody's problems all the time is not wrong, and it's a good thing. And when you finally start to recognize that, you can actually grow and you can actually make changes that help you and your patients better. So I see a lot of patients doing the opposite of that, and what I was doing for a long time, and what ends up happening is that they sort of are just going further and further in this hole of resentment and unhappiness, and their patients are taken care of to some degree decently, but there isn't this really true rich connection that I think is amazing to have if you can. So hopefully this information is somewhat interesting or useful for somebody else to hear, because I think I'm not the only one on this journey. And I've been asking myself, what do I really want to talk about on this YouTube channel? And I've gone different directions, and I'm sort of starting to simplify it and just say what I want to hear somebody talk about. Whether anybody watches or doesn't is sort of doesn't really matter. And I'm sort of tired of everybody trying to grab everybody's attention constantly, and using people for whatever, and trying to sell them things and exploit people for things. And I get that everybody needs to have a business and everybody needs to make money, but that's not going to happen here. Like, I want to share my thoughts on what I'm experiencing, and I would find that really refreshing to hear as my personally. So if you've ever been in a situation where you felt like you were constantly saying yes to things that you didn't want to, or you didn't know how to say no to people without feeling really horrible inside, and how that has affected you, whether it's being a doctor or being a lawyer or being a mom or being a dad or whatever it is, maybe share that, because I think it's really important for all of us to help each other recognize that we are best when we're being real and authentic. And out of that comes so many more useful things than when we're trying to act or trying to be something that we're supposed to be, or do something that we're supposed to do for the sake of looking or feeling like we're doing the right thing or being a good, morally pure person. Like, that sounds great, but it isn't actually what it is. And again, in the future, I'm going to be talking about topics like this. So hope you enjoyed this, and have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.